Welcome back to Decentralized Radio, your one-stop shop for education on how you can take back control of your health and your wealth and live outside of the centralized systems that are plaguing our society. We're hosting industry experts every Tuesday live and also releasing podcasts Friday morning.
Hey, welcome back to Decentralized Radio. It's me again, Ryan. I have a wonderful guest today to talk about primal movement, sun, being outside, all sorts of the things that we like to talk about on the podcast. But how are you doing today?
I'm absolutely great. How are you doing, Ryan?
You know, I'm doing great. Like I was saying pre-show, this is a great way to kick off the day here in the U.S. I know you're kind of across the pond over there, so it's probably late afternoon for you. But I wanted to have a discussion with you because we don't have too many people on to discuss what I consider a sort of fourth pillar to a stool of health, and that is movement. We've had a few people on, but not too many. Overwhelmingly, we talk about food, we talk about obviously quantum health principles, light water magnetism, which I know are all things that you instill in your own regimen as well as with a client work, but we sort of don't really dig into a lot of the movement pattern things. But I'd love to start just with your journey because usually, and I'm sure you experience this as well online, when you meet people, you'll find people that are in a certain niche, but you bring all these pieces of the stool together into one unit. And that's truthfully what I think builds the most resilience, the most recovery, and the most rejuvenation for people in general, because none of these pieces work in isolation. Everything's happening everywhere all the time. But I'd love for you to sort of dig into your journey about obviously how you found your current movement practices, but also just your journey in health as well, because it's not commonplace to find all these pieces of the stool for everyone. So I'd love to just hand it off to you and let you tell your story.
Thank you so much for the awesome intro. And that's actually what I really respect about your work as well, because I love to see people bringing the pillars together, because it's not only one thing that will fix us or break us. It's like there are so many things that come together, and especially if we are trying to heal from something, we can do one thing perfectly, but necessarily that's not enough. So we need to start thinking, okay, where are the faults that I could still fix, and where can I get better to do better? So basically, like, I think if we start from my background, how it all started for myself, I wasn't always doing so great. So basically, my health started crumbling at quite an early age, and I just couldn't figure things out. I was like, why am I feeling like this? And maybe, the medical side of things, they make you feel like, okay, it's just is what you have, and you just cannot do anything about it. And I just somehow couldn't always accept that. So from an early age, I was struggling with some autoimmune stuff, and that kind of like led me to try and find solutions. But I wasn't really fully working on it because my health had never fully been taken away from me. And when things got really bad, when I was somewhere in the early 20s, I was studying university, I was doing a lot of work, I was training a lot. So there was basically so much stress piling up that my health just totally collapsed. And I was like, wow, what am I going to do now? Because I cannot train anymore. I cannot move anymore. I can barely do life. So all those like necessary things that we think that we need to do, we need to, work, we need to study. So we need to get our degrees and all that good stuff. So basically how it all happened led me to try and find solutions. And obviously, for me, the most easy thing to start fixing things was the movement side of things, because that was where I was super passionate about. I just felt like, I get the life force when I'm training. I'm feeling so awesome. That's giving me such a mental boost and all that. And basically, I had to start figuring out, because my it's not really my condition, but what happened to me started impacting my joints, and I just couldn't do what I had been doing so far. So I was trying to figure out ways, how can I implement exercise and movement in my life without it actually pushing me backwards? And this is where I started really harnessing the power of movement. So I started moving outdoors. I started going for long walks. And then when I was able to, I started incorporating primal movement, just really gentle movement to allow my nervous system to really accept what I was trying to show it. So often we think of exercise as a let's go and push the limits, but sometimes we cannot always just push the limits. So this is where I started practicing the primal movement patterns, and this was really where I was able to gain that acceptance to the system. But at the same time, as I was healing, maybe I was able to see mostly what I was doing in terms of the movement. But at the same time, I had moved countries, so I was living under the sun more, and it was getting towards the summer, and things started really, really going amazing for me. And then after all this, I moved back to Finland, where I'm originally from, and things started going downhill again a little. So then this is where I really started figuring out that okay, it's not the exercise the issue or the healing puzzle. It's not the nutrition. It's not any of these things in isolation. But I started figuring out that the light environment where we are living impacts us massively, and all the other non-native EMFs as well, because I started figuring that the environment where I was living wasn't the same as the environment where I left, because actually I had left from Finland around maybe 5-6 years ago, and then things were not so overwhelming on my system, because I feel that the lighting was still a little different, the EMF exposure for all the other things was a little different, and now when I went back to Finland, I felt like this is just overwhelming for my system. And after all this, I moved to Cyprus, and here things started going well again. So I felt like I just gained so much health just by being in a sunnier country and doing all the other practices that I already was doing. And this is basically where I started more harnessing the power of not only the movement and the nutrition, but also outdoor lifestyle, sun, um, mimicking our indoor environment as much as we can with the natural environment, and bringing together the seasonal puzzles as well. So this is basically like a little bit of a background story how I came to where I am right now. And obviously movement is a big part of the puzzle, like you already mentioned. So I'm really, really happy to dive more into details about.
Yes, no, yeah, no, all that is so fantastic. I love how you sort of concisely stated that fundamentally it's an environment as a whole that is causing people to break down. And for those that are already dealing with problems and they're kind of doing the natural attractions of what they think they need to be doing to promote optimal health, but they're not getting all the way, it really behooves people to sort of remove themselves, sort of like I kind of make it the image of you're sort of departing from your physical being, and your soul's like kind of lifting up so that you can get a 360-degree view of what's really going around in your life. And I always tell people, once you sort of remove the noise of modern convenience and modern lifestyle, actually the answers become very, very clear. I've worked with a couple of people that are in Norway, which is funnily enough. And one thing that we often discuss with seasonality is that if you're sick, you might be doing better if you do move somewhere a little bit more south and have a little more access to light year round, because there's so much variance that far north. Once you get above 50th latitude, it gets really nuts. And if you're not really embracing those principles in that seasonality, which isn't necessarily fun to do at 50th latitude when you have 4 hours of light during the winter, or you're not getting tons of sauna to sort of amp up that infrared light exposure, it can be really difficult to make headway. And we're sort of all living in a bucket of our own toxic environment, not just like physical toxins that we take in like microplastics or PFAs or mold, but like we're constantly just in this bucket. And if we're not emptying it at least as fast as we're filling it, or if it's overflowing and we're trying to empty it, you got to do more than what maybe the average person needs to just to survive, because we want to thrive. And so I like that you sort of brought all those pieces together. Now, when it comes to movement, there's a lot of different realms of thought. And I've come to the same place that I've come to with some of these other principles, where it's not so much about being right and wrong. It's about finding the way your body moves best in space, leaning into that, and then pushing the limits slowly over time, like building muscle and hypertrophy, right? You sort of slowly add things on. But I do believe, obviously, there are certain biomechanics that humans are meant to move in. Obviously, there's things like walking, sprinting to a degree. We sort of have the squat position, and our arms, shoulders definitely built for throwing in those movements. So maybe we can talk about just proper human biomechanics and how modern living messes those up. Maybe modern realms of training, but we'll kind of get into that in a minute. And then how you found primal movements to assist in building natural movement patterns. And I really like these ideas of really having yourself grounded. You have really great videos displaying this on your Instagram page of being on all fours, touching the earth, and that sort of brings it together. But let's first talk about just proper human biomechanics and how we mess it up.
Are you looking to get the benefits of grounding and earthing, but really just can't be barefoot all the time? Yes, you know what I'm talking about, right? Absorbing free electrons from the earth, improving your circadian rhythm and blood flow and vitality and redox. And that is why I'm excited that this show is brought to you by Rhizal Shoes. Rhizal Shoes are, in my awareness, the only non-sandal grounded shoes. They have slip-ons and they have cool boots as well with laces that are not only grounded via a copper plug, but have leather outsoles made with water buffalo hide. So they're all natural. They are grounded and they're barefoot and minimalist with a wide toe box. This is imperative for foot health, and it's really going to keep you connected in a modern lifestyle setting so you don't have to walk around barefoot all the time. I love them in the winter time. I can wear socks with my slip-ons and not be freezing cold trying to be grounding. You need to check them out, folks. Rhizal Shoes, RHIZAL.co. Rhizal.co is their website. Use code DRadio at checkout for 10% off and get your shoes, get grounded, get connected, and improve your health.
Absolutely. And I firstly have to say that I totally agree with you. Like when it comes to any realm of health, really, I don't like to say one thing is better over another. And I don't think there is such a thing, because every single movement principle and exercise principle, they have their time and place. So for anybody to like say that this is the right thing for everybody at every single time of your life, it's just like a little bit far out there. I think we can take the puzzles which work for us right now, and we can also always be super open to changing our things, because this is where change happens. Like right now, what I'm doing, maybe that's not what is serving me until the end of my life. Maybe I need to change some puzzles, you know. And I think this is the same with any health aspect, really. But yeah, basically, obviously, right now, we are a little bit troubled when it comes to movement, because our lifestyles are sedentary. So we are mainly stagnant in one position throughout the whole day. So we are sitting, aren't we? So we sit in front of our laptops, in front of our computers, obviously working and all that, which we must do. But then what happens after work or in the break times or whatsoever, we don't change our positions enough. So I don't ever say any position or any posture or any movement is bad per se, but it's just that we lack the variety. So we actually lack more movement, but we also lack the variety of movement. And this is where I always advise people to keep changing things up. So if you are sitting a lot, try and stand a little more, or can you go for a walk, you know, like just to keep that body changing, because that's where the fluidity lives. It's like our body wants to be fluid, it wants to move free. And yeah, maybe you can forward me from here, because maybe I forgot the initial question. Sometimes I start shifting to one direction, and so you can
I do it.
keep me
I do it
focused.
all the time. I do it all the time, where I like start telling a story and then I'm like, where was I going with the story again?
Yeah, absolutely. What did he ask?
Like that's such a good point about just in general. It's not that labeling movements as good or bad is the answer, and that goes across all realms of this space. It's that we are just simply in certain positions more than we should be, and that's due to modern demand. I mean, most people work in 9 to 5, they're in an office, whatever. They don't really get up to move around and stuff. So it's actually, like you said, it's about breaking up movement patterns and focusing on little things throughout the day. I think it was Mark Sisson who kind of coined the term like micro workouts, and that's something that can work for some people, where instead of doing like 1 hour 4 times a week, you kind of break it up into like 10, 20 minutes here throughout the day. And you kind of do that throughout the week. And you sort of have to figure out what works for you best. But when it comes to primal movement, I guess my next question along that line was, how does this address those patterns? And how do you help people find that variety for themselves throughout the day?
So the beauty about primal movement patterns is really that we are working close to the floor. So here, like as you can see, like on our every single everyday life, we are mainly just putting the load on our lower body if we are putting the load on anywhere really. So what really gets weak is on our upper body, and we get a lot of back tension, we get a lot of neck tension. But when we are moving close to the floor, or even just like holding our body weight close to the floor, the gravity is coming to from a different direction in terms of our body, and that is really helping us to strengthen our core muscles, our shoulder muscles, our back muscles, and all this, which is actually totally without any load in everyday life. Because if we think about it, our body was designed to move in all directions. We were basically, when back in the day, we used to climb in the trees, we used to run, we used to sprint, we used to do all kinds of movement patterns, but now we are lacking that. So when we are moving close to the floor, we can really start utilizing our forelimbs all together, you know, moving on different directions, forward, backwards, sideways, and kind of like taking things from there. So it's not only one directional patterns that we can do, but eventually we can move in all planes of movement. And this is really beautiful because this helps us to really build those connections in our system. And it teaches our brain different ways, because often our brain only knows what we show it. It's kind of like a survival thing. So if you never lift a heavy weight, you cannot really lift that heavy weight, because you didn't show your nervous system what it is to deal with that weight. So why would you be prepared for that weight? Because there was just no reason for that. So this is one reason why we lift the weights, but then this is also the same reason why we want to move in different directions, because this really helps us build those connections and makes us able to move in those directions. So often I hear when people come to movement training, like the one that I, for example, show on my IG page and all that, they just don't, I just can't do it. But we cannot do it something that we never did before. So we just have to slowly practice the movement patterns and show our body the acceptance, and then we take it from there.
No, I think that's really important, everything you just said, because it reminded me of a statistic I read that was talking about specifically around low back pain and disc bulging, disc herniations, and disc protrusions. It's probably one of the most common conditions in modern chronic pain existence. Like there's like a high percentage of people that at some point will experience lower back pain in general. And one of these studies that I'll link down in the show notes below talked about how 40% of individuals with protrusions actually don't have pain. And in fact, when you look at an MRI, they shouldn't be making diagnostics of chronic pain from a disc protrusion. It's actually not correlated. So there's more to the picture than just a scan. And that's why it's funny. I have conversations with people about going to the doctor to get a diagnosis for like they hurt their knee or they hurt their back or whatever, versus going to maybe a physical therapist, which physical therapy in a centralized system has its flaws for sure. But I've always found it more valuable because, like I'm sure you can attest to, things don't happen in isolation. So most people that hurt their knee doesn't usually have to do with the knee unless you directly clocked it on something. But it usually has to do with the kinetic chain either below or above. And this can affect a lot of things. Like a lot of people will walk around with rib shifts based on the way that they sit or stand or walk, and based on the way that they appropriate gravity on themselves. Everyone's being pushed down with gravity constantly. And so we develop those compensation patterns to rebound against gravity. And if we don't have proper mechanics, we're going to have points of compression and points of laxity. And so when we talk about things like core strength, it's really interesting because we don't realize how much we actually use our core to move throughout space. And it's not just the superficial muscles on the abdominal side. We have these sort of psoas muscles that do a lot of work. We have these muscles on the oblique side that do a lot of things. Maybe we could talk a little bit about when it comes to pain in accordance to maybe like muscle dysfunction, neurotension. When you work with someone, what are sort of your first couple things you look at to determine, like, okay, your pain might be in your back, but what's really going on is you have dysfunctions here and here that might be associating that pain up the chain or down the chain? How do you look at an individual to sort of assess that?
Absolutely. Well, there are some really fundamental movement patterns that we want to look at because we can quite clearly often see if the person is compensating in any position. And also, like, what I like to think about is like, what is the position, where are you spending the most of the time in your day at? So then we can take it from there because we can see, and most often it is some tension on the hip area, it is some tension on the lower leg area. A lot of people just don't have the proper movement in those joints. So often, like, maybe you can relate to this, but it is the, like you said, lower back, the knee area, the ankle area, and oftentimes it is not that area where the pain is coming from. But of course, like, our body is like a huge chain. So it's like often there is tension at some point, or there is maybe too much laxity at some point, and then that will reflect somewhere down the line. So actually, because I'm not a therapist and I don't actually even try to solve any problematic things, but what we look at is where do we have the lack in a proper movement, and how could we try to address that through strengthening the core muscles, through working on all fours, through working on another areas of life, another areas of the body. And that will usually resolve some of the person's pain or some of the person's discomfort. They will figure that they had less pain as they are sitting down, or that will also, because the beautiful thing about all this is that often our focus in life is in everywhere else but in our body, because the way that our system is built. But when we start moving, and when we start moving intentionally so that our presence has to be there, when we practice new movement patterns, we actually start becoming aware of our system. So we start realizing, like, okay, I'm feeling pain there, I can do this kind of movement, I cannot do that, or if I'm doing like this, it's feeling better after. So this also translates to the other areas of life. So not only in the movement practice, but when we take ourselves out to do life, we start realizing that, okay, if I'm like this, it's not actually feeling good on that area where usually I have pain. So can I maybe change? Because I think most of the magic happens when we become aware and when we can actually root ourselves into our body and stop observing, because actually our body always gives us the signs. It's just a matter, can we hear those signs, or are we even interested in hearing those signs?
Yeah, that's, oh man, such good points, because I think about this concept a lot of just being more self-aware in space and actually doing things like primal movement patterns, or uh, more exercises that really encompass the whole and not so much isolated movement, which I think there's still practicality to isolation training. Like I said, there's no black and white answer. But it is, even with those isometrics, right, in the gym. I mean, you'll hear this from straight up just bro science gym bros, that you can tell that every movement they make is intentional with connection. And so when you see people that start going to the gym because they feel like that's their missing piece, and it probably is, they might make that early mistake of just, they look up a video on YouTube or someone on Instagram, or they Google a workout and they try to go at it without addressing their own biomechanical dysfunctions. And it may sometimes play, at least in my case, into that same compensation pattern that has contributed to pain. And like you said, it goes outside of what you do for that hour or 30 minutes that you are practicing movement, because really it should be, I look at movement now more as like training my body for life so that I can move throughout the day comfortably, but also just more optimally so that my body is more thermodynamically efficient with energy. A lot of people don't realize how inefficient their movement is. I'll see people jogging on the street every morning that you can tell just from watching them that, one, they're uncomfortable, and two, that because they just think that they need to go out there and run, which I'm giving them props for doing it in the first place, but they're not addressing, they're kind of like hunched over, they're putting way too much compression on the thoracic spine because they're just like not keeping everything in a nice braced fluid motion. And there's the opposite side where people are bracing way too much. I mean, people that hurt their back are told they need to brace constantly. And so you're not braced constantly. Like, your muscles should turn on during movement. And then when they're not moving, they should be in a relaxed state. It's sort of like with glute activation and walking or running. Like when you run, it's like you should be having glute activation, but so many people have frozen glute syndrome standing that they're putting all this pressure other places. How do you feel about, one thing that I've been practicing for myself is the idea of practicing turning on different muscle groups during the motions that we use them in. So I used walking as an example, and like making sure my glute fires as I walk, so I'm not creating a compensation pattern higher or lower. How do you feel about, does primal movement sort of address those patterns of like teaching your body to turn on muscles when they're appropriately supposed to be on? Because I think about things like glute bridges and hip hinges, and things that people would classically use to train glutes. And I'm using glutes as an example just because it's a muscle that a lot of people don't develop correctly and is frozen. But do you find that those exercises, while I think can be valuable, don't necessarily train that muscle to be used when you would normally evolutionarily use it, which would be during movement? How does primal movement sort of address that, so that, like you said, we do move better in space throughout the day? Because that's really the goal, honestly.
Absolutely. And because how I see primal movement and working on all fours, this kind of mobility stuff, when we are really using the body as a chain, we are not really trying to work any specific muscle group. So this is also where I see a lot of people are actually a little puzzled. They don't really know how to work, how to begin this type of training, because if the idea from gym training is that we are supposed to really do specific amount of reps for a specific muscle group, then it can be a little foreign, because it actually feels in your whole system, but it doesn't feel like it's actually taking all energy from the system. So it's totally different. And I actually feel that this is where the magic happens for those kinds of patterns as well, which we all are carrying. We all, if we are able to be present in our body and start observing, we all have some tension in areas which is most often prevalent there. For example, you might be holding your one hip all the time in a slight tension, and you might notice this if you are laying down and it's not relaxing equally as the other side. But these kinds of things, I think, holistic movement, like movement which is helping your body to work as a whole, it's helping in a way, but in a long term, because you are really firing muscles that you were not firing on rest, and then the muscle is allowed to relax when it's not working. And because we are working those muscles in a chain manner, this is where the magic happens, and often maybe it is not that area of tension where the trouble is, maybe it is on another end of that chain. So yeah, I think primal movement mobility training is fundamental for this, for sure. And equally, we could learn a lot of this stuff when we are doing that running or gym training or something, but often our idea when we jump into those exercises is that we just want to go there and smash it. So the idea is not necessarily to go for a run and learn what can I hear from my body today, or kind of like try and observe that, okay, my lower back is not feeling right. Okay, so where was my pelvis during my running and all this stuff. So this is something that we slowly start fixing when we start introducing our body the movement patterns which allow our body to work as a chain. So I 100% see benefit there working
Yeah,
in this fashion.
it's interesting. I think everyone would sort of would do well to slow down and just pay more attention. And it's hard to do because, like you
Absolutely.
said, it's like everyone wants to go out there and just like smash a workout, or they feel like they need to like be in this level of intensity to burn enough calories or whatever. That seems to be sort of the mainstream realm of thought. But I think you have this new perspective when you have challenges with movement and you're doing all the right things, but it's just not working for you. And then it sort of forces you to open your mind to like, okay, how am I actually moving in space? So I think this is actually a good spot to sort of connect some of these other dots that we mentioned very early on in the show about other realms of health, such as like working out outside versus working out inside under artificial light, because you do get sort of this extra bang for your buck. I mean, we talk about like exclusions on water on the show quite often. We had Gerald Pollack on not too long ago. Just saw him at a conference, so we'll be posting that video as well. But these pieces come together when we are in nature in the, you know, predominant environment we were meant to be in. And so firstly, I just want to ask you, have you noticed differences when you do certain training? Because you still use gym work, which I think is totally appropriate, but do you notice differences training outside versus inside as far as performance or energy or just like looseness or warm-up time?
If you're a health conscious food consumer who's also very active, you know how big of a struggle it is to find a bar that is both convenient and nutrient dense. That's why I was so excited when I discovered the Alpa Bar. The Alpa Bar is a meat based bar that contains only simple ingredients: 100% grass fed beef, tallow, and honey, and is both nutrient dense and convenient, and packs a caloric punch of over 300 calories. For me, this was a game changer and is now the go to snack and fuel source I use when I'm hiking, camping, hunting, skiing, or doing anything in the outdoors and I don't have the resources to cook a full meal. The Alpa Bar is made proudly in Colorado and only uses locally sourced meat. JJ and Rob are also extremely based and accept Bitcoin for payment. I highly recommend you check out the Alpa Bar for any time you need a nutrient dense and convenient snack on the go. Check them out at eatalpa.com and use code DRadio5 at checkout to get a 5% discount. And if you pay in Bitcoin, you can get an additional discount on top of that. That's eataupa.com and use code DRadio5 at checkout.
Absolutely, 100%. Like I am really big proponent of outdoors living, and it all comes down to a lot of things that your audience will know about already. And because my niche really in movement is mobility training, and how do we acquire mobility? Well, of course, through the movement, but I don't believe that is even the full piece of the puzzle. So actually, even mobility comes down to the metabolic health and how can we stay hydrated in our tissues, because actually you probably see it a lot also in individuals who are living this indoor lifestyle, maybe a lot of tech, and the body gets really dehydrated, and this could be a really trouble. And what I see in my clients is that the tissues get stiff, so it's really hard to get in the positions anymore. So this is where it all comes down to this holistic approach. So we need the natural light, a little less of the artificial light, and we need the good food in season and little less of that process. And it all, I think it's the same with the movement as well. But when we take our body outside, what do we have? We have grounding, if we can do it without shoes, and if we can go to the beach or to the grass, or we most people have something, because a lot of people tell me that, well, I'm lucky because I have the beach and all that. Well, I am 100% lucky, but if I even had a piece of grass, that would be absolutely fantastic. You know that a little wet grass on your toes, it's going to help you ground so nicely. Oh, yeah. So this is where we get one piece of the puzzle, and then we have the sunlight. Obviously, if it's hot in the summer and our body is not used to it, then we can seek for the shade or whatever our body is ready to receive, or do it in the morning light or a little later in the evening. But this is where we really gain that hydration for our tissues at the same time as we are moving, and this is going to help our goals. If our goals is to get flexible, get stronger, move better in general, become more functional, I think those things cannot be dismissed at all. So yeah. And And basically, in contrast to training outdoors, training indoors under artificial blue light and in a little bit more suboptimal conditions, I think that is okay for a healthy person most often, because we are not going to spend there for a lot of time. If our practices are okay otherwise, I don't see a trouble going to the gym. But if we are really in a place where we are trying to heal, our nervous system is just totally fried, we are not doing so great, those places, they just can be a little bit too overwhelming for the system, because of course there are a lot of stressors which we don't have outdoors. So I told you previously, I worked as a personal trainer multiple years in Finland, and for myself that was really a tough thing, because there was no windows, there was only like the blue lights around me, all the EMFs, and I think I heard you once say that you started getting nosebleeds. The same, yeah. yeah. The same happened to me, and I started just figuring that okay, there is something going on here. So even in Finland, I started transferring some of my movement practices outdoors, and that was just amazing. And I just started realizing that wow, like we do need to take ourselves outdoors more often. If the training, if our movement practice can be that time when we spend more time outdoors, even better, because this is where we really recharge our batteries. It's not all about just depletion, because obviously we know that already a depleted battery cannot be depleted no more. It has to be recharged. So
100%.
so the more so yeah. So this is my thoughts about outdoors training, and I think it's totally a practice that will be really transformational for many.
Oh yeah, especially like when I love that you brought up hydration, because that's such a missing link for a lot of movement practices. Like we had someone named Carrie Bennett on the show some months ago, and we were talking about, she started out as, I believe, a massage therapist, and what she would notice doing myofascial release on people is it would help people feel better for a little bit, but she couldn't figure out, one, why it was working, and two, how to maintain its like result, because it eventually stiffness would return. And I think, like you said, it goes back to this tissue hydration that a lot of us are lacking, just being in the improper environment. Being outdoors, we have that infrared light coming from the sun all day long, and that infrared light really feeds our body's ability to make that exclusion zone water, which hydrates a lot of our tissues, especially in the fascia and the collagen matrix, which is so important. And there are a lot of ways you can sort of tackle that. You alluded to probably the biggest one, which is being outdoors in general and having skin exposed in the areas where you might have this tightness. But one thing that I think about is a lot of people will resort to like stretching it out as a way to increase mobility. So I'd love to dig into some mobility practices a little bit more. Maybe we could go over some like basic mobility things. Obviously, we're not demonstrating here, so it's kind of, we have to kind of go us word. Check out our page; there's a lot of good stuff. But what are some areas that you like to open? Where areas where you find a lot of the most restriction? Obviously, probably hip flexors, areas of sitting and stuff like that. But how do you help people work on those first? Because there's also the issue where I see people overstretch, and then they're ending up stretching the joint tissue and not actually where they want to be gaining the mobility they want. So I'd love for you to sort of just go into some of the basics.
Oh, absolutely. So basically, like the fundamental topic to this also is the fascia. So obviously, our fascia is a really a tissue which can shape according to its environment. So it can be also too lax. So for example, we don't want to stretch out too much, because it is beneficial for us as humans to have a little tension in the system. So if you think about it from a survival point of view, you want to be able to instantly sprint as fast as you can. And what does this require? This doesn't require a lax system, it requires tension, because this is how the power is generated. So also, we need to think about this in terms of stretching, that maybe our body doesn't want to just stretch too much. It's not necessarily natural for our body to all the time be keeping pulled. Well, good. I think good analog is like if you have a resistance band. you pull it too much, and it loses its elasticity. It doesn't come back anymore. So often I see this being a little bit of a trouble when it comes to extreme stretching. So if we are just constantly seeking for that flexibility, we actually might be causing more pain on the areas where we were trying to fix things. So the area where I definitely see the most amount of troubles is the hip area and the lower back area, and that all goes hand in hand. So I think most of us have heard somebody or a family member or somebody has a lower back issue, and often there is just this idea that we just need to crack that back or keep stretching that back or something like this. But actually what I see that helps the most is when we try to strengthen the tissues around. So not so much pulling things apart, but actually helping the body to keep things together nicely so that we can feel at our best. And what we do when we do mobility training, we work through full ranges of motion with strength. So actually it's very active movement most of the times, and we are not holding the stretch to stretch deeper really. And oftentimes, of course, what you see on my social media and all this, it's quite extreme movements. So most of the people, we don't really start from there with, but we want to fix the fundamental patterns first. So let's say a deep squat. This, I believe, is quite fundamental for us as humans, because if you look at the child, they can squat down so deep, their bum is touching the ground almost, and they can stay there forever. But we as adults, we cannot do that so easily anymore. And how could we start getting in those positions so that our nervous system and our brain can accept it? Well, it's obviously not to force it down there, but it's to do it through progressions. So these are the ways that, like, these are the places where we start from. And then if we can already start being flexible enough to, for example, let's think of a basic hip flexor stretch or a strengthener. If we are on a plank position, and when we are taking one leg outside or one foot outside of our hand, almost into like it would be called something like a lizard step or low lunge or something like this, depending on the movement principle. This is where we are really active on the position, but we are able to, by pushing that front knee forward slightly, sinking those hips down, we are able to stretch out that hip area. And obviously, we need to get back from this position into that plank where we started from, and this is where the core comes to play. So we are always pulling up with the core and returning the leg where it came from. And basically, this is a good I think a good demonstration to think about it as a mobility movement which requires strength rather than actually stretching things out by just holding it there, because equally we can do the same position by lowering the back knee down and just hold it there. And then we wiggle ourselves out from the position. Of course, we can do that with strength as well. And this is not to say that there is no time and place for stretching, because I think everything has its time and place. But we need to think again, what are we doing most of the times, and is it yielding results? So if I'm stretching every single day and I'm still so stiff and I might still have a little more pain, can I do things differently now? Because maybe that's what my body needs. And another good idea for something like tight hip flexors, tight lower back, maybe we need to start strengthening those glutes, like you said. But that doesn't mean we want to start squeezing them all the time, because here again, we need to remember that our muscles need to be able to fire quickly, but they need to be able to relax. So if we are all the time in this fired state, we are getting troubles down the line. And this is equally the same with anything to do with our nervous system. If we are all the time fired, in this stressed state, and we are never able to come down, then that causes troubles down the line. So our body is really not good at dealing with chronic stress. It's good at dealing with small bouts of stress and calming down. But if we are locked in that state in our musculoskeletal system or otherwise with our nervous system, then that's a trouble.
Yeah, that's all those are such really good points. And one thing I want people to think about, just because it came to mind while you were talking about sort of that firing and then turning off. We want our muscles to be able to do that kind of at cue. And one thing I was thinking about was like when you do, for example, a bicep curl, for sort of a poor example, when you're going into full extension, you're stretching the bicep. So there is a stretch there. And then when you come back, you're stretching to a degree the tricep opposite side. So like when you think of somebody sprinting and you think about their quad and hamstring activation, now there's a lot more going on. I'm ignoring the calf and the glute and a couple other muscles. But when you think about it, in certain extensions, you're going to be stretching one of those, the ham, and then you're going to be contracting it. And it's really about creating a uniform movement through motion. So that's where I think a lot of people get lost, and we can kind of get into the weeds and lose people, because when people are working out, it's like, oh, I want to go do, arm and shoulder day or whatever. But there's so much more going on. Like there's so much more going on in like your upper back, thoracic, your trap activation. And then you see people get these injuries, or they have really, like commonly really tight trapezes in here or scalenes. And that's because they're not thinking about all these other planes of movement that are happening during the motion of a movement. So that's why I think from that primal movement perspective, it's great to just teach people to have that notion of where they're at in space as they move. And at first, it's definitely seems counterintuitive, just because it's not what anyone's used to paying attention to. But once you get it, it's sort of just like second nature, and you're just moving through space. And it's really amazing how much better you feel moving through space than before. It's sort of like it takes me back to when I was a little kid and I was doing Taekwondo. There's a lot of none of those movements are isolated. Like everything's connecting up and down chains through those movements. And I think when you sort of go into a stereotypical maybe bodybuilding training, you sort of lose some of that awareness. Doesn't mean you can't get it back, but it's just sort of not the basis of those areas of training. One thing that really interests me, just because there's such a big movement around, like, obviously, I just kind of want to break this down for people. Like, people find the movement that they like. So people go into the yoga camp, or they go and do like the sort of gym bro fitness, like isolated movement training, compound movements. I think that it's fine to do all of those things, but I don't know if you can just do one and maintain optimal movement patterns for the duration of your life. How do you approach sort of, because I see you do a lot of these, like you're kind of incorporating a bits and pieces of all of them. How do you view it? How do you cycle that for yourself? Because I do definitely see in the gym, there's good photos of your back, like doing like some pull downs and stuff like that. How do you gauge that for yourself? Obviously this is unique to you, so take it with a grain of salt, people. But how do you gauge those moments of like, when is it appropriate to train in isolation? When is it appropriate to like work on this full connection through my lower chain,
Artificial blue light from technology is destroying our health. It disrupts melatonin production, sleep quality, and our circadian rhythms, which has been linked to pretty much all chronic disease. It also rewires our dopamine reward system, which makes it addictive by design. That is why I'm so thankful to have found the Daylight computer, the first company in the world making a computer that has a blue light free screen. They use paper reflective screen technology, so it's blue light free, flicker free, eye strain free, and is easily used outdoors, so you can use technology while getting the benefits of full spectrum sunlight. For more information, you can listen to our recent podcast with the founder of Daylight Computer, Anjan, on his incredibly inspiring story on why he wants to bring technology to the masses that is not detrimental to our health. You can go to buy.daylightcomputer.com/dradio to pre-order the Daylight tablet today and begin using your technology in a fashion that's way more in line with our biology and nature.
Absolutely, and this is such a great question, actually, and I think it all comes down to practice and learning your body and learning your goals also. So how can it, because when we have a goal, then we can program things appropriate to our goal. So obviously, if we want to improve on any area of movement, or we want to build muscle, or we want to whatever our goal is, maybe it's physique related, we want to program things so that we can consistently show up and get those results what we are what we are seeking for. And actually, this is something that I have also learned over the years, that people get stuck on one movement principle, which could be a beautiful thing, but it is almost a bit like nutrition, which is kind of lacking the other nutrients, if it makes sense. So we might be just like overdoing that one thing without balancing it out with the other things. So a lot of people, for example, I'm a yoga teacher myself, so I have absolute respect towards yoga, but a lot of people actually who show up on their mat consistently benefit lifting a little weight, because that will help them actually build the strength on the areas where maybe they are already getting a little too loose, or maybe it's just a lot of repetition on the shoulder, or whatever it is on the individual. So for myself, I have built a routine which for me right now works perfectly, and I'm aiming to build muscle in the gym, because I believe muscle is a fundamental organ for our metabolism, and it just has a lot of benefit. And then I'm doing mobility training so that I can be better in movement, so that my body can work as a chain, so that my body can understand like how to connect those different muscles together and how to make it into a movement. And walking, because I believe walking is a fundamental movement for human, and I always encourage anybody start with that, because a lot of us just don't get that hip movement going on in the day as it is. So I think walking is one of the most fundamental movements and that we can do. So always I think we need to move before we train even. So if we don't do anything, obviously anything is better than nothing, but I think we need to learn how can we implement more movement in our day. And then when we get that movement in a regular basis, then we can start thinking how can we now implement those trainings in our day. And maybe it can be some micro, or how did you call them? I don't remember, but little movement snacks.
Yeah,
That's
I just
how
call
I
them
them.
micro workouts.
Yes, micro workouts or movement snacks I like as well. So that we do, let's say, 10 minutes every day. Whatever we can fit in our routine and what doesn't feel too overwhelming for us. But I believe we need to be open-minded when it comes to training. Like, what is it that is going to provide me the best at this time, the most at this time? So think of it as an investment. You are investing your time. What is it giving you in return? And 100%. A lot of us also don't like to do hard things. So sometimes we might need to just accept that doing something that is not so pleasurable is going to yield the result. Because also I see that a lot of, I don't know, we are building this kind of softness around things these days, which is totally fine, because we need to be soft as well. But at the same time, we need to accept that, okay, if I do the hard thing, it's going to give me in return, and it's actually going to give me such a hormonal boost as well, and I'm going to just feel so much better. So it's not all about just doing the easier things, but it's all about doing what matters. So this is where we need to figure it out, and often it means maybe we need to work with somebody, or maybe we need to figure things out, like how is somebody else doing them. Maybe we can get some idea from there. But oftentimes, obviously, if you don't have any experience, I always encourage to go with a coach and ask the coach to build you a program at least, so you know what you should be doing or what you could be doing, you know, in relation to your lifestyle and all that, because we do need to always appreciate our lifestyle. We cannot just stack things on top of each other. This is where I say, what can you do right now so that it still allows you to recover on a daily basis and do your life? Because eventually exercise shouldn't be taking your life force. It should be giving you more than it's taking. It's like one of those stressors which should be making you stronger rather than degrading you.
Exactly, yeah. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people just have the wrong mindset around it. They're just sort of like, they look at fitness as a chore, when you really got to reframe that as an opportunity, because it's sort of like that saying. It's like, I don't really like it, but it's not a bad saying. It's just like, if you have time for something you enjoy, you'll make time for it. Like, everyone has time to move. It's just making it a priority. And actually, I think that's the largest barrier to helping people, is just simply helping them realize it should be a priority of their life, not just like another job that they have to do after work. And so it's about
Absolutely.
reprioritizing lifestyle, and that takes time. And that's why it's like you never jump into like going gung ho. Some people do really well with that, but that's a good point too about doing hard things and balancing that, because like I said, yeah, there's this big swing right now into into empathy and understanding people's feelings, and all that stuff's actually great, but it's like gone way over here, and now I'm just waiting for it to swing back to the middle, because it's sort of it needs to encompass this full yin yang effect. And so that's why
Absolutely.
if anyone takes anything away from this conversation, it's probably one, it's sort of about balance. Two, it's about appreciating awareness. And three, it's about being open minded and not ever thinking you've entirely figured it out, because we're always learning and adjusting. And as we age, like you mentioned, things change and you got to make adjustments for that as well. One thing I want to touch on just before we sort of end the show, because I find it to be really common in people, even within myself, is neural tension. People will be working on mobility, and they'll find that it's like they reach this point where they can't go further, and it has nothing to do with the actual laxity or stiffness, but it's their nervous system is just wired, and it will just not let them go because it's guarded. I think actually a lot of pain goes back to guardedness more than actually a physical scannable issue. And so maybe we can talk about just like the idea of neural tension briefly, and how you view it as like we need to calm the nervous system, because we've mentioned that a couple times.
Absolutely, because for anything that is like the most important thing for our brain is that we are safe, right? So if our brain perceives a movement pattern scary or threatening for our system, it's just not going to allow us to go there, which would make sense because otherwise we might break, right? So how can we, if we are constantly just trying to get better on that one movement and nothing is happening, like we are trying to get into that split or whatever our goal is, because I see this being a big motivation for a lot of people, but we are trying and nothing is happening. So firstly, how are we showing our brain that it is safe to go there? Because if we are forcing, it's never going to happen. So maybe often what happens is that if we are working on a specific moment and we are not seeing the goals that we are seeking for, or on a specific joint range of motion, then maybe we need to shift the focus somewhere else. So let's say it is the hip. I'm constantly talking about the hip. It's just easy area to focus on. So basically, if we are not getting the results what we are looking for, maybe we need to shift the focus more to our core, more to our glutes. Maybe we need to shift from the front side of the body to the back side of the body, because maybe that is actually where the magic lies. So I don't like to keep staring the area where the problem is or the pain is, but actually start figuring out what is going on around the area. So maybe we can actually gain the access from our nervous system to those ranges of motion if we are showing it safe through strengthening the other areas and working it through that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's such a good point, and everyone should hopefully take that into account, because it is a big part of a lot of people's issues. Is really, it goes back to that awareness. But I've had a really fun time
Absolutely.
talking to you. I love digging into this stuff. It's so great. But where can people find you, reach out to you, book a session with you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram. I'm Tiina Maaria, which is TINAMAARIA, and my website is mobility-fitness.com. And so all my services are there, and on Instagram you can just send me a DM, and we can figure things out from there. So yeah, and on Instagram, of course, I put a lot of mobility stuff, inspiration. Of course, we know that on social media things are quite fast paced, so I don't really always just instruct people to go and copy me or something like this, but maybe it could be an inspiration and show you what could be possible. And then we always need to be honest with our own capabilities. So when it comes to movement, I never actually would advise people to go straight to the deep end. It's like it starts from the basics. So we work on one layer at a time. This is how it works, because it all comes down to the nervous system and the brain, as we know.
Well, I appreciate that about you. I think it's a great nuance to put in there. But thanks everyone for joining me, and we'll see you again in the next episode of Decentralized Radio. Everyone have a good one.